Well, kids, it's that time of year to sit around the table with family, eat dinner, argue about politics with that one uncle, and unwrap gifts. And boy oh boy, what family would be more screwed up to do that with than Venom and all their offspring? So, I thought today it'd be fun to take a look at the Venom symbiote's messed up family tree. Let's dive on in, shall we? I'm sure the patriarch itself needs no introduction. Black Goo, bonded with Spider-Man first, usually but not always bonded to Eddie Brock. So let's just start with the kids. The first and most famous would be Carnage, who's arguably just as popular as Venom himself, so I'll keep this one relatively brief. Cletus Cassidy is a prolific serial killer who also just so happened to be Eddie Brock's cellmate when his symbiote came to break him out of jail. The symbiote just so happens to give birth to a new one while on the way out, and it bonds to Cassidy on a molecular level due to a cut on his hand, and they become Carnage. Carnage is quite the threat because there is no higher motivation, he just kills for the sake of it, and having a symbiote allows him to do that on a much bigger scale. He's such a fearsome enemy that Venom and Spider-Man regularly need to put their beef aside to deal with him, the latter even nearly putting his morals aside and considers outright killing him because he's too dangerous to keep around. Carnage has had nearly as long a journey as Venom himself, getting into all sorts of shenanigans like getting torn in half by Sentry, becoming a sort of prophet for Null, god of the symbiotes, and so much more. But that's enough about him, let's move on to the next batch. The next 5 can be lumped into one package deal since you rarely see them outside of their group, save for one. In Venom's first solo series, Lethal Protector, he's captured by the Life Foundation and has a bunch of symbiote seeds extracted from him, resulting in 5 spawns bonded to would-be super soldiers. These characters wouldn't be named for years after they're introduced, but to cut to the chase, their names are Riot, Agony, Phage, Lasher, and Scream. Scream is really the only one with some semblance of a personality or a history outside of the pack. The other 4 are all pretty interchangeable. Always had a soft spot for Lasher though. He just looks neat. But yeah, Scream is bonded to a woman by the name of Donna Diego. I won't bother going over the others because their hosts never last long. Their first hosts all got stabbed in the back, literally and figuratively, by Scream in Lethal Protector's sequel, A Separation Anxiety, where they all saw Eddie's help trying to understand their symbiotes better and be truly compatible, until Donna kills them one by one during a schizophrenic episode where she's convinced all symbiotes and their hosts are evil. So she escapes to parts unknown to do whatever Scream do. Now, I mentioned Scream has her own adventures outside of her breed of symbiotes, but before we get into that, I need to go over the other 4, because their fates have important context to understand what happens to Scream later. In the Venom miniseries Along Came a Spider, Agony, Phage, Lasher, and Riot are all kept in confinement at a top-secret research facility in New York, watched 24/7 by a bunch of guardsmen in Iron Man-like armor. One of these guardsmen is one Scott Washington, who really only took the job because he wants to save up enough money to move his family out of Bed-Stuy due to the horrific crime rate. He just sees them as alien monsters, but that all changes when they temporarily bond with him, and he realizes that they're not trying to take over the world or anything, they're essentially just scared kids. Because of this, he ends up hesitating rather than killing them during an escape attempt and gets fired, so his dreams are dashed. So he moves back in with his mom and brother Derek, the latter of which decides to pick a fight with some members of the Easy X's gang over a basketball court. Both brothers end up getting shot for their trouble. Derek ends up dying and Scott can never walk again, which is the perfect time for the symbiotes to find him. They end up merging into this hybrid symbiote, hereby known as, well, hybrid. This even allows him to walk again while bonded. Hey, wait a second. Needless to say, Scott isn't the same agreeable dude he was last time they bonded and now wants revenge. The symbiotes don't want to kill anyone, so in a rare role reversal for these guys, they have to keep him in check from going too far. But he does get justice for himself and his brother when he takes out the group who shot them, and a reality check when he realizes the city doesn't care about his neighborhood because his neighborhood can't even care about each other. So Scott swears to use his newfound power to make Bed-Stuy a better place, and his brother can rest easy in a more peaceful area, which is what Scott wanted for him and his mother. He even gets offered a spot on the New Warriors, but he's too busy with Bed-Stuy to worry about the bigger picture, which I and that team can respect. Alas, Scott meets a brutal and unceremonious end during Flash Thompson's time as Venom, when he's cornered and murdered by Eddie Brock, who at this point had been Venom-free for several years, and got the mindset that all symbiotes as well as their hosts are evil. The 4 symbiotes would later be captured and dehybridized. They'd pop up occasionally, but not what I'd really consider a major capacity, more plot devices than characters. They got bonded to some new soldiers in time for Carnage USA, where they're dispatched to free a small town from Carnage's hostile takeover after the Avengers dropped the ball. And they also dropped the ball so badly, the government has to carpet bomb the entire town just to end the threat. The four of them continue to pop up in various symbiote-centric stories, such as Absolute Carnage, Extreme Carnage, and Venom War. Oh yeah, and they did a Voltron with Deadpool in Deadpool vs. Carnage. I prefer the hybrid approach, but that's neat too. But back to Scream. What's she been up to during all this? Well, it turns out she actually had something of a redemption arc. After the events of Planet of the Symbiotes, where an army of symbiotes try and fail to invade Earth, Scream tries to turn over a new leaf and help benevolent symbiotes survive and peacefully integrate into society on this strange new world they're stuck on. And her schizophrenia has never seen her mentioned again. She even teams up with Venom to take out a xenophage, an alien shapeshifter which loves to feed on symbiotes. After that, she reappears in an exclusive Universal Studios comic of all things, since she makes a major appearance in that. I bring this up because this comic of all things is where she finally gets her name. After that, she disappears until investigating Hybrid's murder, realizing too late that it's a trap set by Eddie and she's also killed. Scream doesn't reappear until Absolute Carnage, where the symbiote is resurrected by Null, why do I have to talk about Null? God of the symbiotes, in order to help Carnage collect codexes from previous symbiote hosts. It basically puppets Donna's corpse until finding a new host, a woman by the name of Patricia who, you guessed it, was also previously bonded to some alien goop at some point. They're forced to hunt down Andy Benton, formerly known as Mania, who some of you may remember from the Legacy Characters video. After wrestling free from Null's control, she uses this opportunity to sacrifice herself fighting Carnage and buy Andy an opportunity to escape, and then Andy bonds with Scream, runs, and manages to live another day. Pops back up in the sequel comic Extreme Carnage, where the Scream goop is once again being controlled for Carnage's benefit, and Andy is forced to use her Hellfire abilities to kill the symbiote for good. You know, despite being more developed than the rest of her batch, it seems no one really knew what to do with Scream in the long term either. All five seem to suffer from the same problem a lot of symbiote stories tend to fall into. They rely on the novelty of a new symbiote that looks cool, or X character being bonded to Y symbiote, but having a symbiote isn't inherently the same as having character. Venom and Carnage stand the test of time because their hosts make the character. Carnage is nothing without Cletus, and Venom has at least 4 interesting hosts worth talking about, but these 5 don't have that benefit. Aside from Scott as Hybrid, these 5 never stick with any one host for any substantial stretch of time. Instead, they're just passed around like at a college party.
Hey, Major. What the fuck?
What would I do instead? Simple, really. I would just have one host and stick with one host. Donna was perfectly fine as Scream, and I ended up being a lot more invested in Scott and his relationship with the hybrid symbiotes than I expected. Part of me suspects that these characters weren't even intended to make it past the initial Lethal Protector miniseries. When they were brought back in Separation Anxiety, no one had anything resembling a concrete idea on what should be done with them. But anyway, enough about them. Time to move on. Okay, this is where things are about to get really convoluted, and I apologize in advance. But I promise I will try to keep things as concise and understandable as possible. Next up is Dylan Brock. It may be weird that I'm talking about a human boy and not a pile of goop, but hear me out. So it turns out the Venom symbiote had been hiding quite a lot from Eddie, and deleting memories for God knows how long. This including his son Dylan, conceived during a time where the suit bonded with Eddie's ex-wife Anne Weying, and made her become She-Venom, and also impregnating her without either of their knowledge. I have several concerns about this, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So Anne gives birth to Dylan and gives the baby to Eddie's father, Carl, not wanting him to know about their child since he was a spider-hating monster at the time, and the symbiote just hid that little factoid for years on end until it started freaking about Null waking up and laying waste to everything. The reason this is all relevant is because when a symbiote bonds to someone, it forms a unique codex, which Null wants so he can add them to his hive mind. It's significantly more complex than that, but Null is a can of worms I'd rather avoid if I can help it. But the reason I bring it up is because instead of a codex being part of Anne, it was instead passed to the fetus, Dylan, making him a living codex, something Null would really like to have under his control, since as it turns out, the unique circumstances of his conception give Dylan the ability to control symbiotes in a way only Null himself has been able to. So, in a roundabout way, Dylan is Eddie and the symbiote's child, which is why he's included here. So, Eddie risks life and limb protecting Dylan from Null, Carnage, and his father, who's arguably more of a monster than either of those two. After the events of King in Black, Eddie kills Null and becomes the new god of the symbiotes, and as a result, something of a deadbeat dad to Dylan, outright leaving him for days, if not weeks on end, to deal with cosmic stuff. And this is where Venom lore gets really convoluted, and I apologize in advance if your head hurts as much as mine does by the end of all this. So, Dylan gets roped into what I can only describe as utter insanity when he's ordered by his father to run away from home, while his father is in the other room. It's weird, but only gonna get weirder from here. So, while out on the run, Dylan has to deal with a lot of threats, both familiar and new, including but not limited to being kidnapped by the Life Foundation so they can further research the symbiote race, Carnage doing Carnage things, and domestic terrorists. But most importantly, he has to save his father from himself after a near-death experience from a symbiote known only as Bedlam, which turns out to be none other than Eddie Brock, but from some point in the future, who's being ordered/manipulated by a villain known as Meridius, who's also Eddie Brock, but even further into the future than Bedlam is. With that revelation in mind, Dylan's mission is to either free Eddie from this loop, if it even is a loop, or to kill Eddie if he can't be freed. After having something of an epiphany with who he is, his unique ability to break symbiotes free from the hive, and his overall goal, he adopts an edgy new name and look as Codex and recruits a team of symbiotes to confront Eddie, consisting of himself, Rascal, aka Normie Osborn, the grandson of Norman Osborn, Flexo, the Rubber Man, a robot from the 1940s made partially using symbiote biology, Bren Waters, current host of the Toxin symbiote, and Sleeper, who we're going to get into here in a minute. All that brings us to the current, as of the time I'm writing this, arc, Venom War, where Eddie and his kinda sorta future selves commandeer a kind of symbiote wrestling ring in order to get Dylan's attention and get the Venom symbiote back. He needs Venom in order to break the loop. So here's the catch-22 they find themselves in. Dylan saw a glimpse of a possible future showing that if Eddie gets Venom back, he'll essentially become Null 2.0 and be the end of everything. But Eddie saw a future where if Dylan keeps Venom, he'll result in a future where the symbiote takes over the world, resulting in what Eddie dubs Venom World. Seems like the latter is the more likely future to happen, as Dylan's own future self pops back in time to prevent Venom World from becoming a thing. So hopefully by the end of this little tournament arc, father and son can break free of this loop. But it's not a loop at all. No. A loop is a constant repetition of the same events. The very definition of insanity. But a loop has no variables. As we found out, this very much has room for twists and turns. Father and son finding new ways to defy their fate. No, this isn't a loop at all. It's a spiral. A spiral that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper with no end in sight. Like the spirals found on Null symbiote.
Major? Major, can you hear me?
What happened? I was listening.
You started ranting about spirals and hit your head. Who the heck is Dylan?
Don't worry about it. We're never going to speak of Dylan again.
Oh, good, because you still have one left to talk about.
Mother! Oh, thank Null, I can finally move on. Last but not least is Sleeper, who, much like his Life Foundation brethren, was not named until years after he was introduced. Sleeper had it especially rough even before the little goo ball was born, with Venom hiding the pregnancy from Eddie for as long as possible because it was scared the newborn would turn out a monster like all the others. Hey, I resent that generalization. Just because Scream and Carnage committed unspeakable acts against symbiote and humankind doesn't make them all monsters. The other four didn't do anything wrong, and maybe you two are bad parents if you're just gonna lump them all in like that. But anyway, compound that anxiety with other complications result in the birthing process being excruciating, like human childbirth, compared to the previous times it spawned and barely even noticed it happening. And then we get a beautiful little avocado baby. Unfortunately, this is when Venom's original host, a Kree soldier by the name of Tel-Kar, shows up. He apparently never found out that the Kree-Skrull War ended years ago, so he kidnaps the Venom symbiote to fight a war that's already over, leaving it up to Eddie and the little one to get it back. So we find out about our Bundle of Joy's unique abilities, mainly stemming from chemicals and pheromones. So he can do things including but not limited to making people confused or lightheaded, put them to sleep, make himself completely imperceivable to them, and the list goes on. Yeah, carbon monoxide can do all the same stuff. You ain't special, kid. So they foil Telkar's plans, and Sleeper gets really tired of his
Scrap.
when he threatens to wipe out humanity by unleashing a Kree bioweapon, and as payback for turning Venom into a mindless goop servant, straight up lobotomizes him. Yeah. Hardcore for only being a couple weeks old. Add insult to injury, and Sleeper decides he's just gonna use the comatose body to explore the universe and leaves. Something of a bittersweet note to end on, but luckily it doesn't stay that way. Sleeper returns in absolute carnage to protect Dylan from all the bull
Frag.
Carnage was up to, and he sticks around to act as Dylan's protector and older brother? Technically, Dylan's got a decade on him, but symbiote maturation is weird. Apparently, at some point, he also left a little bit of himself in a suitable host just in case it was needed. A sleeper agent, if you will. Sleeper with a host ends up being hilariously overpowered by symbiote standards, which comes in handy when Dylan needs to be broken free from the Life Foundation, like I mentioned earlier. As of right now, he's chilling as part of that symbiote suicide squad Dylan put together. Overall, I like Sleeper. Looks cool and he's pretty likable. Not sure how I feel about him being so OP with no discernible ways to counter his abilities, but that's fine. Hope he starts showing up in other media. So before we end things, here's a quick lightning round of symbiotes I don't consider true Venom offspring, since I have a feeling someone would have brought them up if I hadn't. Toxin, Raze, and Scorn are all offspring of Carnage, not Venom, but maybe worth exploring in the future. A new spawn was born during Dylan's shenanigans, bonded to Black Widow and simply called Widow for right now. Unclear if it was spawned from Venom or Toxin though. Last but not least, Anti-Venom and Mania. Main reason these two aren't included is because they're essentially clones created from scattered remnants of Venom, and they don't seem to have any consciousness of their own, so they're not really alive in that sense, so I'm not counting it here. So that's all for today. Thank you all for watching. This is Major Disasters signing off. And make sure to look away from his screen for at least 20 seconds to prevent yourself from becoming the biggest deadbeat dad in the Marvel Universe.